It was an unusually cold morning in Seattle when Jeff Bezos decided to take a different route to the Amazon headquarters. He wasn't in his usual black SUV, nor was he accompanied by security. That morning, for reasons he couldn't explain, Jeff had chosen to walk the last mile to the office. Maybe he wanted to feel the city again, see the faces of people he rarely encountered. Or maybe, deep down, he was searching for something, though he didn't know what. As he turned onto a side street near an underpass, Jeff saw a man sitting on the curb with a sign made of cardboard. It read, "I don't want money. I want a chance." That alone would have been enough to catch anyone's attention. But what truly stopped Jeff was the look in the man's eyes. Tired, hollow, yet burning with something more than despair. It was resolve. Jeff paused, something he almost never did when walking in public. The man looked up, startled, then squinted as though he couldn't quite believe who he was seeing. You're Jeff Bezos," the man said, not with awe, but with matter-of-fact certainty. "I am," Jeff replied, his voice calm. "And you're looking for a chance?" The man nodded. "I've made mistakes. Big ones. But I'm not stupid. I just need someone to stop seeing me as trash." Jeff stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at his coat. Then he said something that surprised even him. "Come with me." The man blinked. "What?" "I said, come with me. You said you want a chance. Let's see what you do with one." And just like that, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, one of the richest men on earth, reached out a hand to a homeless man with a scruffy beard, dirt-caked nails, and a backpack that looked like it had been through war. The man's name was Darren Miles. Jeff didn't take him to a shelter. He didn't send him to HR or tell someone else to handle it. He brought Darren to his office. Heads turned, jaws dropped, and some assistants whispered nervously to each other. Jeff didn't care. He called in his chief of staff and said, "Set him up with a basic employee ID. Give him a temp desk downstairs. I want him shadowing the logistics team. Full access. No restrictions." "But sir," the assistant began, "he has no experience." "I didn't hire him because of experience," Jeff cut in. "I hired him because he's hungry." What followed over the next few weeks could only be described as surreal. Darren came in every day. He didn't speak much at first. He wore the same clothes until someone from HR discreetly gave him a voucher for new ones. He slept in a temporary room Amazon arranged through one of their community housing partners. He showered in the company gym. But he watched. He listened. And he learned. Darren took notes. Hundreds of pages of them. He scribbled during logistics meetings, whispered questions to interns, and spent nights reading the internal operations manuals that most employees ignored. After 2 weeks, he quietly approached a junior operations analyst and said, "I think your entire mid-mile tracking system could be streamlined by 20% if you reroute your second-tier warehouses through St. Louis instead of Dallas. You're clogging up your own network." The analyst laughed at first, but Darren pulled out a flowchart he had drawn by hand, showing where the bottlenecks were happening and how rerouting through a central Midwest location could cut fuel costs and delivery time. That same day, the analyst ran it by his supervisor. Within 48 hours, the recommendation made it to a regional VP. And 3 days later, it landed back on Jeff Bezos' desk. Jeff called Darren up. "Where did you learn to think like this?" he asked. Darren shrugged. "I used to be a supply chain manager. For FedEx. Before I lost everything." Jeff didn't press for details. He didn't need to. He saw the fire in Darren's work. Over the next few months, Darren went from the homeless guy Jeff brought in to a respected mind in the logistics team. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to climb the ladder. But his insights, they were gold. One day, during a particularly intense quarterly review, Darren stood up and challenged a senior director's forecast. He laid out a completely different logistics model using modular hub-and-spoke algorithms he'd adapted from open-source military planning software. The room went silent. Then Jeff, sitting quietly in the corner, started clapping. 2 weeks later, Darren was promoted. But the story didn't stop there. Because when the media got wind that Jeff Bezos had personally hired a homeless man, The internet erupted. At first, people were skeptical. Some said it was a PR stunt. Others accused Jeff of using Darren as a pawn. But then they saw the data. They saw the logistics improvements. They saw the employees who started going to Darren for mentorship. CNN ran a segment titled From the Street to the Boardroom. Time did a cover story. Even Elon Musk tweeted, "This guy Darren might be smarter than all of us." But fame never touched Darren. He stayed in a modest apartment provided by Amazon, bought a bike instead of a car, and spent weekends volunteering at shelters. Not to give out food, but to give out notebooks, pens, and copies of job training materials. "They don't need pity," he told a reporter. "They need blueprints." One day, a young man at a shelter asked Darren how he had done it. Darren smiled and said, "I stopped waiting for the world to save me. And then the world sent someone who noticed." Jeff Bezos didn't just give Darren a job. He gave him platform. And Darren used it not for wealth or status, but to build a system where others like him could follow. A year later, Amazon launched a pilot program called Second Chance Logistics, modeled after Darren's journey. It provided job training, mentorship, and housing for qualified homeless applicants who showed aptitude for logistics, coding, and operations. Darren became its first director. In an interview at a leadership summit, Jeff Bezos was asked what moment in his career had surprised him the most. He didn't hesitate. "It was the day I walked to work, saw a man with a sign, and decided to listen." The room went quiet. He continued, "I've started billion-dollar projects. I've met presidents and kings. But nothing changed me more than watching someone rise not because I gave him power, but because he had it all along and just needed one open door." The audience stood in applause. And as for Darren, he never stopped carrying that cardboard sign. He had it framed. It now hangs in his office, right above his desk, where the world can see it, and where no one will ever forget what a chance can do. Darren Miles never intended to become a symbol, but that's what he became. Not because he craved the spotlight. He didn't. If anything, Darren was allergic to attention. He turned down interviews, avoided camera crews, and refused to write a memoir, even when offered hefty advances from publishers. "This isn't my story," he would say quietly. "It's the story of everyone who got pushed aside, then fought their way back." But as the Second Chance Logistics program expanded, Darren found himself more involved in shaping not only the logistics framework, but the human side of it. Every month, he sat down with new applicants, men and women who had lived in cars and shelters on the streets. Some had PhDs, some had GEDs, some had criminal records, some just had bad luck. But all of them had one thing in common. They hadn't given up. And Darren refused to let the system give up on them. He redesigned the orientation program himself. It didn't start with lectures. It started with questions. "Tell me something you've built," Darren would ask each newcomer. "It doesn't have to be a company. It could be a routine, a way to survive, a method to keep your shoes dry in the rain. Tell me how you think." That's what matters. What followed was nothing short of revolutionary. The first wave of Second Chance graduates didn't just adapt, they innovated. One former welder from Detroit developed a system to track temperature-sensitive packages more efficiently, reducing spoilage in perishable deliveries by 17%. A woman who had lived in a tent in Oregon created an intuitive app that streamlined driver break schedules, cutting down missed deliveries without violating labor laws. Bezos watched all of this unfold with fascination. He started spending more time with Darren, not in executive meetings, but during walkthroughs of the Second Chance warehouses. They would walk side by side, Jeff in his neatly pressed shirt, Darren in his worn denim jacket that he refused to replace. It was during one of these walkthroughs that Jeff asked a simple question. "What do you think I've gotten wrong?" Darren didn't hesitate. "You built a machine so efficient it forgot it was run by humans," he said. "But now you've got a chance to rebuild it. Slower, maybe, but smarter." Kinda. That single comment changed how Amazon approached not just hiring, but culture. Jeff ordered a review of the entire hiring pipeline, particularly the parts that discarded candidates based on gaps in their resume or past mistakes. Slowly, quietly, the gears began to turn, and word got out. Other companies started to notice. First, smaller tech startups, then FedEx, then UPS, then Walmart. Within a year, a ripple effect began, a movement toward reintegration hiring. Not charity, opportunity, real positions with real expectations and real dignity. Darren, for his part, kept building. He traveled across the country, visiting shelters, halfway houses, addiction recovery centers. Not as a speaker, but as a recruiter. He listened more than he spoke. When people asked how they could be like him, he always said the same thing. Be better. Don't follow my path. Build your own. Then came the moment no one saw coming. A year and a half after Darren was hired, a young woman named Alina, a second-chance graduate, saved Amazon $24 million in shipping costs with a new predictive routing algorithm she developed while living in a shelter in Phoenix. She had coded it using public computers at a library. When she finally had access to a laptop through the program, she perfected it. Darren submitted the algorithm to the executive board himself. Jeff called her personally to say thank you. That moment sparked something in Darren. He realized this wasn't just about logistics anymore. It was about genius in unlikely places. And so, he pitched an idea to Jeff, the Hidden Genius Fund. The premise was simple. Amazon would allocate an annual fund to incubate ideas from second-chance employees. No resume screenings, no venture capital pressure. Just an open door to propose something, build it, and see what happens. Jeff approved it in 24 hours. In the first year alone, the Hidden Genius Fund backed 19 projects. 4 of them became full-fledged Amazon pilot programs. 1. A redesign of last-mile delivery hubs that utilized modular, solar-powered pop-ups was rolled out in 11 cities. It reduced delivery times during extreme weather by 32%. Reporters once again came sniffing around. But Darren declined interviews. I don't care if people know my name, he told one journalist. I care if they remember that it's possible, that people can change, that systems can change. But his past wasn't done with him. One day, a man appeared in the lobby of Amazon's Seattle HQ. He was older, balding, with a hesitant walk. He gave the receptionist a note. Please give this to Darren Miles. He'll know who I am. The note read, You don't know this, but you saved me. I was the supervisor who fired you at FedEx when you missed too many shifts. I never knew you were homeless. I thought you were lazy. I am sorry. I followed your story. I'm proud of you. And I've started volunteering. I'm trying to change too. Thank you for what you've done. For all of us. Darren didn't say much after reading it. He folded the note, placed it in his drawer, and sat quietly at his desk for a long time. When Jeff asked him later why he looked so reflective, Darren simply said, It's strange. When you're down, the world sees you as a statistic. When you rise, they see you as an inspiration. But I was the same man the whole time. By year 3, Second Chance Logistics had expanded to 38 cities. More than 12,000 people had gone through the program. And then came the speech. Amazon was holding its annual shareholders meeting. Jeff Bezos invited Darren to speak. Darren didn't want to, but eventually agreed. He stood before thousands of shareholders, analysts, and executives. He didn't use slides. He didn't use a script. He simply told his story. About the nights he slept in stairwells. About the shame of washing in gas station sinks. About the moment a stranger offered a hand and expected something from him, not out of pity, but belief. He ended the speech with this. You build a company that delivers anything to anyone, anywhere. But the most important delivery you ever made was a second chance, to me and now, to thousands more. Thank you for letting us build this with you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Jeff walked onto the stage, shook Darren's hand, and whispered, You've done more for this company than any algorithm ever could. Years later, when Jeff finally stepped back from the company, he wrote in his farewell letter, I've built rockets, empires, and supply chains. But the proudest thing I ever did was hire a man named Darren Miles, who reminded me that brilliance often wears dirty shoes. Darren continued his work long after Bezos left. He launched an independent nonprofit to help other corporations build similar second chance programs. And every Friday, without fail, he returned to the same street corner where Jeff first found him. Not to relive the past, but to look for someone else holding a sign. He never stopped believing that one moment, one decision, could change a life. And sometimes, change the world. By the fifth year of the Second Chance program, it had touched over 40,000 lives. What began as a single decision, Jeff Bezos pausing on a sidewalk, had grown into a nationwide transformation. Companies that once ignored resumes with gaps now sought out candidates from Darren's program. Universities began studying the success rate of rehabilitative employment models based on Amazon's template. Economists noted something they hadn't seen before: a measurable drop in chronic homelessness in cities where Second Chance was active. But not all of it came without resistance. Some executives on the board started to question the growing investment in social programs. "It's not our business to fix society," one of them said during a closed-door meeting. "It's our business to deliver packages." Darren was there. He waited, calm and steady. And when the floor was opened, he stood and replied, "If your packages are delivered faster because of a man who used to sleep on the street, maybe fixing society is part of the business." The boardroom was silent. Jeff nodded slowly and said, "Let's remember why we're here." And they did. But outside the company, there was growing public curiosity about Darren's past. Journalists dug into old records: arrests, evictions, credit defaults. Photos of a gaunt, unshaven Darren waiting in line for soup kitchens were plastered across blogs and news sites. Some said he was unfit to lead any corporate division. Others called him a symbol of redemption. Darren didn't respond to any of it. Instead, he released a single statement through Amazon's press office: "Everything they're saying is true. I failed. I was broken. But I wasn't done." Those words spread like wildfire. People related. CEOs, janitors, teachers, even war veterans wrote to him. Thousands of letters poured in: emails, handwritten notes, packages full of notebooks and journals, some scribbled on napkins, all saying the same thing: "Thank you. You gave me hope." But what really caught Darren off guard was a letter from his daughter. He hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. The last time he'd seen her, she was 7 years old, holding her mother's hand at a court visitation hearing. Drugs, joblessness, and homelessness had severed that relationship. He had never blamed her. He blamed himself. The letter read, "I saw your name on the news. I wasn't sure it was you at first, but I watched your speech. I cried. I remember when you used to tell me bedtime stories about building things, bridges, trains, cities. I just wanted to say, I remember, and I forgive you. I hope we can talk." Darren sat in his office alone, holding the letter for hours. That weekend, he flew to Denver. He didn't tell Jeff. He didn't tell anyone. He just showed up on her doorstep. She opened the door slowly. Her eyes welled up instantly. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They just hugged. And for the first time in 14 years, he said the words he thought he'd never earned the right to say: "I am sorry." That moment changed something deeper in Darren. He returned to Amazon not just as a leader, but as a father, a man mended in places he thought would remain broken forever. And it was then that he realized the next step wasn't within Amazon. It was beyond it. Darren approached Jeff with a proposal to create a spin-off organization, Framework, a nonprofit built to help corporations, cities, and even governments design their own second chance models, custom-tailored for their industries and populations. It would be independent of Amazon, though supported by it. Jeff smiled and said, "I thought you might outgrow us." And so began a new chapter. Framework launched with a team of 12, most of them second chance graduates. They worked with city officials in Atlanta, partnered with veteran support groups in Los Angeles, and advised global corporations in Germany and Japan. Darren became a quiet force behind systemic change, always refusing to be the face of the movement. He believed the face should belong to those just beginning their climb. Then, one day, Darren received a letter from a boy in Brooklyn. His name was Jamal. He was 14 years old and lived in a shelter with his mother. He wrote, "My teacher showed us your story. I didn't know someone like me could become something important. I want to build things too. I don't know where to start. Can you help?" Darren framed the letter. He wrote back personally, inviting Jamal and his mother to visit Framework's New York office. He spent the entire afternoon with the boy, teaching him how to use warehouse simulation software and helping him sketch out a model for a neighborhood delivery service using bicycles and solar-powered lockers. "Don't wait to be hired," Darren told him. "Start now. Solve the problem in front of you." That's how I started. Jamal later earned a full scholarship to study urban logistics. Stories like Jamal's multiplied. Framework trained ex-cons to become data analysts. Former addicts became team leads in supply chain startups. Single mothers with no degrees launched local courier services in rural towns. Framework wasn't just giving chances, it was creating blueprints for others to build their own ladders. Eventually, Darren was invited to speak at the United Nations. He stood in front of world leaders, wearing the same watch he'd had for 15 years and a suit that still didn't quite fit his frame. But his voice carried. He spoke not of economics or politics, but of dignity. He said, "We spend billions on innovation. But what good is innovation if it ignores the forgotten? What if the next Einstein is sleeping on a bench? What if the next Steve Jobs is standing in a food line? We don't have a talent shortage. We have a recognition shortage." The chamber erupted in applause. That night, Jeff called him. "You know," Jeff said, "when I pulled you off that sidewalk, I thought maybe I could help you. But you've helped more people than I ever will." Darren chuckled. "You gave me a key. I just started opening doors." Years later, after Darren retired from Framework, a statue was unveiled in Seattle's Pioneer Square. It didn't show a man in a suit. It showed a man in tattered clothes, reaching upward with one hand extended behind him, offering a lift to the next person. On the base, there were no names, just 4 words. "Everyone deserves a chance." And under those words, a smaller plaque, inspired by a man who once held a cardboard sign and changed the world. Years passed. Framework flourished. Cities once riddled with tent camps now hosted innovation hubs, powered by former residents of those same tents. The media shifted. Headlines stopped calling it a program and started calling it a movement. Other billionaires took note. Elon Musk started a pilot version of Second Chance at Tesla's Nevada Gigafactory. Tim Cook partnered with Framework to create a tech academy for at-risk youth. Quietly, and without a central announcement, the largest corporations in America began to change. Not because they were forced to, but because the blueprint had been written by a man they once would have walked past on the street. Darren, however, had begun to slow down. After more than a decade of tireless work, his hair had thinned and turned a soft, steely gray. He no longer walked warehouse floors or rode city buses to meet applicants. His knees gave him trouble. His voice, once hoarse from long days and longer nights, had softened to a gentle rasp. But his eyes still burned with the same fire that first made Jeff Bezos stop in the street all those years ago. And then, one morning, he made a quiet decision. It was time to go home. Not a corporate office. Not a speaking tour. Home. He returned to a small town outside of Cincinnati, where he had once grown up before life took a darker turn. He bought a modest house near the woods, with a worn porch swing and a garage full of dusty tools. He lived alone, but not in solitude. Former Framework graduates would visit regularly. His daughter, now a mother of 2, came often. They would sit by the fire and laugh about old memories, both painful and beautiful. He spent most mornings walking the same trail he used to hike with his father as a boy. Sometimes kids from local schools would recognize him and wave. Sometimes their teachers would pull over and thank him. He never grew used to the praise. He didn't want to. Then, one autumn evening, as the leaves turned gold and amber, he received a call. Jeff Bezos had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Darren sat in silence for a long time after the call ended, not in grief, but in reflection. The man who changed his life had also let his life be changed. They had started on opposite ends of society and met in the middle because one believed in second chances and the other gave one. A few weeks later, a private ceremony was held at a memorial garden Jeff had built years earlier. It wasn't open to the public. It wasn't grand. Just a few dozen people, close friends, family, and a few of the people Jeff had helped without fanfare. Darren was invited to speak. He stood at the small podium, looking down at the forest line clearing, and said, "Jeff once told me that great men build empires, but the greatest men build people. I was nobody when he met me, but he treated me like I was already someone. That's what changed everything." He paused, then looked out at the crowd. The world remembers billionaires, but I hope it also remembers the ones they believed in. Because believing in someone, especially someone no one else will touch, that's the real investment. That's the real legacy. The crowd stood in silence. After the ceremony, Darren returned home. He lived out the rest of his days quietly, gardening, teaching kids how to repair bicycles, writing letters to prisoners who'd written him seeking guidance. And once a month, without fail, he still visited the shelter in Seattle where he'd once curled up beside a broken vending machine to escape the cold. He never walked in like a hero. He walked in like one of them, because in his heart he still was. And long after he passed, at the age of 78, with his daughter by his side and the morning light pouring into the room, his story continued to ripple. Framework outlived him. The second chance movement became global. But most importantly, a quiet tradition began in cities all over the world. On the first Monday of every November, people would go out and hand a cup of coffee, a sandwich, or a handshake to someone living on the street. They called it Darren Miles Day. And every year, millions would repeat the words that once made the world stop. Everyone deserves a chance. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories don't start in boardrooms. They start with a man holding a cardboard sign and end with the world forever changed. The end.